the tragedy of it is that from the outside, everybody sees the two of them as bonding over being hooligans and troublemakers. And the reality is that the two of them bond over being dreamers.
Drive the highway down the moon, past the billboard where you see me, see me, see me, see me. Ask the people for their king.
Welcome back to the Silver Nitrate Witches Movie Review Brew, the podcast where we talk about how we talk about movies, and we are your Silver Nitrate Witches. I'm Isabel Lang. I'm a writer, editor, and tarot reader.
And I'm Laura Valenza. I'm a writer and film editor at the Brooklyn Rail. And I guess I'll start because I'm presenting the movie.
It's your turn.
Yeah. So we are here to talk about the 2022 movie Armageddon Time, directed by James Gray. And it stars Anne Hathaway as Esther, who plays the mother.
The star of our season.
Of Paul Graff, who's our main character, played by Banks Rapita. Yeah, and then, so our main character, Paul, is played by, his father is played by Jeremy Strong. His name is Irving. Then we also have the grandfather, Aaron, who's played by Anthony Hopkins. And then we have Paul's best friend, Johnny Davis, who is played by Jalen Webb. And then we also have cameos from Jessica Chastain and John Deal as Marianne and Fred Trump, respectively.
Oh, God. I literally, in my notes at that point where you're introducing them, or they're being introduced, I have, because I just take bulleted, notes as I'm watching, and one bullet goes, they're all in all caps, goes, "Oh, no." Next bullet, "Laura, no." Why didn't you warn me? Next bullet, "Anyone but these assholes." So,
I know, but the shock of it is good.
It's kind of yeah, I think it wouldn't have been a same reaction if I had known that was coming. It was really wild because I was like, I had to do a double take and be like, wait, did they say Trump? What?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, just to clarify, Fred Trump is Donald Trump's father, for those who don't know. Yes. And I think Marianne is his sister.
His oldest sister. Yes. I was Googling an unfortunate amount about this family while we were watching this movie, trying to figure out who's related to everybody.
But while we're talking about the cast list, can we also just say how impressive it is with all of these big stars around them, these two little boys really carried this film.
Oh my God, yes. Oh, they're wonderful.
Because they're about, between 11 and 13?
They're in 6th grade, so about 12.
Yeah, I think Paul's more like 11, and I think because Johnny was held back,
Johnny's
so I think
repeating.
He might be more like 13.
So yeah, exactly. That's a good point.
Which I think is important, because Paul does have a biological brother who's an asshole. So I think who's a slightly older brother. So I think in a way Johnny is both best friend and the brother that Paul maybe wishes he had.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Yeah.
So this movie is rated R. It's pretty dark. And it's just under 2 hours.
Yeah, no, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, it covers some pretty heavy subject matter. It's not like anything sexually or violently explicit happens in it, but there's some pretty intense language and topics.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, plot summary. In a nutshell, this is not a super heavy plot movie, but it's very emotional. So, Paul and Johnny, basically, they meet at Paul's public school, first day of 6th grade, 1980. 1980 is very important. I think we're going to end up talking about the 80s a lot.
They say the number of the school, too. I think it's Public School 173 or something. It's a very interesting specific title card at the beginning.
Yes, because it is very important to note that we are in Queens, in New York City. So I think that was part of why they did that. We could probably look that up and find out exactly which neighborhood that is. There's different parts of Queens coming. We have Flushing Meadows Park. We have
which I learned all about.
Yes, we have I think the Kew Gardens Forest Hill neighborhood. So kind of deep into Queens. This movie is pretty deep into Queens. And so it follows Paul. He meets Johnny on the first day of 6th grade. They have an awful teacher. They kind of bond because they both get in trouble as being kind of like class clowns. However, with Johnny, who's black, there's also a lot of racial undertones with him getting in trouble. I mean, he does like nothing. Like the teacher just automatically hates him.
We're going to talk about some of that with Taro as well later on.
Okay,
I think that's really important to his character. But yeah, the teacher, I have so many notes where I'm like, oh, okay, so the teacher's racist. Oh, okay, so this person's racist. Oh, okay, so yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty much everybody in the movie.
Yeah.
So, you know, at home, Paul's life is kind of as chaotic as his school life. His brother bullies him. His parents are very hot and cold. We'll get into more details about that. And it's just a big, boisterous, but not always in a joyous way kind of family.
It is a very overstimulating household.
It is. There's a lot of chaos. And then, you know, we have the one person that Paul seems like he really has a connection with is his grandfather, Aaron, played by Anthony Hopkins. Whenever Aaron and Paul are together, Aaron dispenses wisdom. He supports Paul's creativity. Paul wants to be an artist. He's very talented. Mm-hmm. The drawings that we see, he's really got a lot of skills.
Yeah.
And Aaron is basically the only person who really sees Paul and supports him and encourages him and talks to him like an adult. Really.
Yeah.
I mean, they have very frank conversations together about their Jewish history, about racism, you know, yeah.
The parents say a lot of times over and over again, like, Grandpa's the only one who can get through to him. Aaron's the only one who can really, like, talk to him, when really what Aaron is doing is exactly what you said. He's talking to him like a person and telling him the truth. I had a lot of feelings about that, being like the youngest and in a loud family and having various things withheld from me as I was growing up, and even like now still, because people are like, oh, well, I don't want to upset Belle, she maybe can't handle it or whatever, and I just had a lot of feelings about that and Paul's situation and how Aaron was just like, no, I'm going to talk to you because this is important and you need to know.
Well, and I think it's interesting that you pull out the line about he's the only one who can get through to him, because I had a question in here about what lines really stood out to you, and that one really, because I actually watched this movie like a month ago, and that is like the line that's kind of burned into my memory, because it brings up a lot of rage, because I'm like, he's the only one who will. Like, he's the only one who tries.
He's the only one who tries!
Like, they say that, like, Paul is so hopeless. And I'm like, this man literally puts in minimal effort and gets so much out of it.
They talk so much about how he's hopeless. So many of these teachers have marked him down as, like, having learning issues. And I'm just like, this is just a kid who doesn't like school. There's, like, 90% of the other kids there feel the same. Like,
yeah.
What?
And he's a very talented artist, and he does get very focused, and he does get very motivated when he's motivated by his art. And so, okay, so there's also, we're dealing with, like, a family that, this is very much about a Jewish family in the early 1980s who have dealt with their own, you know, instances of bigotry, and they're very liberal. They're Democrats. They don't like Republicans. They don't like conservatives. And at the same time, everybody except for Aaron in this family has no problem with casual racism. So there's a lot of this movie is dealing with hypocrisy. And Paul is at the age where he's just starting to understand this. And because of his friendship with Johnny, he's learning about the nuances of privilege in a whole new way. And basically the movie follows like Johnny and Paul's kind of endearing little adventures at first until they decide that neither of them can take it anymore. Johnny's grandmother has dementia. She can't take care of him anymore. Social services keeps trying to take him away. He really doesn't want to go. And Paul, you know, who gets beaten by his father at one point in the movie, I think with a belt, right?
With a belt, yep.
Yeah. After he, like, breaks down the bathroom door, right? Because Paul, like, goes into the bathroom and locks it and is crying.
His mother says at school, your father's gonna have to deal with you. And Paul immediately, like, freaks out. And the whole way home, he's freaking out. this is a very unfortunately normal thing, and so he knows exactly what that means. He gets home, he runs to the bathroom, he locks himself in, and then he gets into the tub and like cowers in the corner and just tries to make himself as small as possible. It's heartbreaking.
It's really heartbreaking. And the father does break down the door, doesn't he?
He does. He breaks down the door, or he breaks the door frame, and then upon leaving the bathroom at the end of the incident, he says, "You made me break the door."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Paul also wants to get away from home.
Yeah.
So the two of them concoct a plan to be able to run away. They need money, though. They're going to go to Florida to NASA.
Florida and work at Disney and NASA.
Yeah, because Johnny's older brother is down there, right?
Johnny's stepbrother
Is down there. Yeah.
And Johnny wants to work at NASA. He's very interested in space missions. He collects... Well, they wouldn't have been vintage at the time, but vintage-ish. Space mission stickers he gets in like packs. He gives some to Paul. That's how Paul knows Johnny's been, around, because he finds little space stickers on the ground.
Right, Johnny's hiding out in Paul's fort in the backyard. His fort that was built for him when his dad was in one of his good moods.
When he wasn't in an asshole mood.
So the two of them, though, realize to get to Florida, and Johnny also really wants to be an astronaut. So
yes, and then he also tells Paul about how they're building this great thing in Florida. It's called Epcot, and he hands him this gorgeous old brochure from Disney World and says that Johnny can be an artist there. Not Johnny, sorry, Paul can be an artist there.
Right. And I think part of the beauty of their friendship and like the tragedy of it is that from the outside, everybody sees the two of them as bonding over being hooligans and troublemakers. And the reality is that the two of them bond over being dreamers.
They have such big dreams, and there's these gorgeous little moments where we get into Paul's mind and see these little dreams. Like they're at the Guggenheim and he has this dream that he's like opening his own art exhibit with his superhero portrait, and
I love that it's a superhero. It's like a comic book thing in the Guggenheim, which I love that for him.
Hey, if Kandinsky can get in there, so can Paul.
Yeah. Yeah, and so the two of them need money, though, and they come up. So at this point in the movie, too, after Paul and Johnny are caught smoking marijuana in the bathroom, which is made out to be this, well, first of all, they paint Johnny in a super racist light over the use of drugs, and then it's made out to be the two of them being so horrible, but really they're just like two little boys who like were like, oh, I heard this is cool, and like try it for the
not even that it's cool. Johnny says it's supposed to make you laugh a lot. That's it. It's very tame. By the time they're caught too, I think the joint is still fairly large. They've maybe had a puff apiece or something.
So Paul's parents have just been like waiting to get Paul out of public school and send him to private school where his older brother goes, where Paul really does not want to go. His grandparents have some money saved that they can help so Paul thinks his family is really rich. They're not. They're like working middle class. Yeah. Like his father's like a plumber and his mother's like a home ec teacher. The grandparents have some money saved up that they can help send, the two boys to private school, and this incident becomes the turning point that makes the parents decide that's it, you're going to private school. And the private school is super racist, super rich, super white, and super just like demoralizing.
There's a kid named Topper. I feel like that's all you need to know, right? That's like somebody pulled that right out of Dead Poets Society.
So the plan that Paul comes up with to get to Florida is we'll steal one of the fancy, because the school is so rich they have computer. This is 1980. It's a big deal. They have a computer lab.
They have Apple computers, and it's like a classic boxy Apple. I did appreciate that when they finally get the computer out of the school. You can see the logo, the old logo with the rainbow on it, and it's very classic Apple.
So the boys steal the computer, and when they go to pawn it, the cops come and pick the two of them up. And basically what happens is that by some freak coincidence, Paul's father happened to fix like what the boiler
He
of
fixed
one of the
the
cops.
hot water heater of the cop that had initially arrested them, and for that reason, and basically that reason alone. Well, that
and white
reason
privilege.
alone, yeah, exactly. That and the fact that he's like, hey, there's this black kid here, we can pin this whole thing on if you want to take your kid home, for a number of fairly quote unquote lucky reasons. Paul gets off.
Yeah. And then they have a really crushing conversation in the car, Irving, the father, and Paul, about...
But it's the first time his father talks to him like a fucking person.
It is. I mean, I don't know that his father's speech is totally helpful or ethically right, but, like, it is the first time that he actually tries to appreciate that Paul has feelings and speaks to him like an adult and recognizes the confusion that he must be feeling over what's happening. Of course, his father's advice is basically like, just move on and like count yourself lucky, which goes against his grandfather's advice. And there was I think it was the New Yorker review by Richard Brody pointed this out, that his grandfather's advice was to always remember the past, because you never know when the past is going to like come back. And that was specifically about his Jewish history, but his grandfather is also the only one who speaks honestly with him about race relations and about doing the right thing. And so at the very end of the movie, Paul is back at school. I will add in too, there is a moment where, and this parallels with the opening scene when the terrible public school teacher takes Paul's drawing and uses it to ridicule him and to punish him. And then his drawing is taken again at the private school, and it turns out it's because the teacher wants to put it up on the wall as, like, you know, one of the best works of the class and celebrate him.
It's the same. So the public school teacher takes and is like harping on, because he's made a damn almost near perfect copy of a Kandinsky he saw in the Guggenheim 3 days ago, which is very impressive.
There's two drawings, because he also did the caricature of the teacher in the very, like, beginning of the movie.
And so the teacher sees him drawing something that is not the assignment, and what he really harps on is the fact that he's made a copy. And he gets the other kids to like, literally one kid, like, points and laughs and goes, that's a copy! And they turn it into a moment of humiliation. That is really that teacher's education style, is humiliation, and those kinds of teachers should be fired and blacklisted and never be allowed to teach again. Anyway, and then the art teacher at the other school...
Wait, can I also just say that the irony of that too is that, like, a very common practice when you're training young artists is to have them copy, you know, established artist work.
Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's just it's a really good copy, and that is a classic art assignment. Like, anybody else should have praised him.
And then at his new school, the teacher jokes and like talks about how he does, you know, kind of zone in and out and doesn't always pay attention, and he's drawn a rocket ship, and she says, oh, it's a spaceship for our little space cadet, and she says it in a very like gentle, silly kind of, oh, you're not paying attention, come back, honey. And then she grabs the picture and says, it's beautiful, it's very well done, but it's not the assignment, so let's get back to the assignment, please. She like encourages him and then redirects him to do the work, which is how it should be done. But anyway, I had a lot of feelings about teachers.
And then she hangs the art up,
and then she hangs it up in the hallway.
So if everybody's wondering too what the Trumps have to do with this, the Trumps this is a private school in Queens. It's based, I don't remember if they give it a name in the movie.
They
but
did give it a name, and I looked it up, and I don't know that it's real.
Based.
Yeah.
No, it is a real
right,
school,
but no, the name of the school.
I don't think they name it.
Yeah, no.
It's based on the Q Forest School, which is an elite private school in Queens. And so the Trumps have to do with this because they give money there, and they give a whole disturbing speech about
earning things and pulling yourself up by your bootstraps.
Basically the kind of thinking that creates all those little like masters of the universes in the later 80s on Wall Street.
She says at one point it's like, you'll know it's not because it was handed to you when you earn something. Yeah.
Except she's standing there with her father, who handed it all to her.
Did you know that man's
Yes.
name is actually Fred Christ Trump?
I did. Because I read a lot about the Trump family before this recording.
I'm so sorry. First of all, I learned this last night as I was Googling it to figure out how they were all related. And I was like, I had to do like a quadruple take because I kept thinking I must be reading it wrong and it's Chris. It was not. It's not Chris.
Should be Antichrist Trump. Anyway, because I just also wanted to say that, like, that whole point with bringing up the teacher rewarding him at the end is he has this moment where he sees how, you know, because of his white privilege, and even though he doesn't necessarily have class privilege, you know, his grandparents had enough money that they could send him here, he has access to a world where he could succeed in that world. And there's kind of a moment where you can see him wrestling with, like, do I stay here or do I leave? And he ultimately chooses he doesn't want to be part of this. And the final scene of the movie is, like, we don't really, I mean, we know that Johnny's going to take the blame for what happened with the computer, and that probably will ruin his whole life, but we really don't know what happened to Johnny, and that's going to come up a lot in the reviews, and we can talk about that more. But at the end, there's kind of a moment where, yeah, there's a very introspective moment, which I think is really interesting when that happens in movies, because movies are, like, not really inherently an introspective medium. But the ultimate scene is he's, you know, at the school with all the other boys, all the other toppers. Ugh. And he walks away, he leaves. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we don't know what happens after that. He might just wind up back at home and wind up having to go to school again anyway. But I think it's a really important moment of him remembering, like, his grandfather's words that all basically come down to, like, be somebody who thinks for themselves. And I think it's very symbolic of, we know that whatever he does, he is always going to think for himself and not, there's a lot of, like, the mass that will just buy into things because they're promised money and success. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so I think that it's a subtle rejection, and I don't think it's meant to be. There's one of the critics, I don't remember who, will probably come up, it says that this is not a movie that's about redeeming Paul. Mm-mm. So I don't think it's a moment of redemption. It's just kind of this subtle moment of he still has his own mind.
I think we've talked about it in another episode a long time ago. I don't remember, but I know I've talked to you about it of there's this bit in, oh God, what's the show? Shoot. I don't know. Do you have any clues? Oh my God, it's not Human Resource, Big Mouth. Where, you know, wow. the kids are getting into this, like, angry conversation about, like, gender equality, and the only conclusion they can come to at the end is that they're still yelling at each other, and they're like, well, how do I make this better? And then the girl goes, I don't know, I think we just have to keep having these conversations. And that's the feeling I get from the end of this movie, is like, nothing is better, and we just have to keep having these conversations.
Totally. I think that's actually a perfect, like, way to read, lens through which to read this movie.
I think Paul's going to be tortured by these things for a long time, and maybe the rest of his life, and I think he's always, it's complex, and he's just something he's going to have to continue to navigate.
Well, funny you should say that, because Paul is director James Gray, who's now, like, in his 50s.
Okay. I wondered if this was a little autobiographical.
This is a semi-autobiographical. So this is...
You like these.
Yeah. So he actually even, like, worked with people. He couldn't get the people who currently live in his childhood home to let him film there, but they worked really hard to replicate the childhood home as much as possible. You know, and a lot of, like, the posters and things that influence Paul are things that, you know, he was into at that age. And the story of what happens with Johnny is based on something that happened to him and a friend. So this is actually, like, you know, a semi-autobiographical movie. And I also think it's interesting that, you know, the whole, like, I guess we just keep talking about it, because I do want to, like, call out, too, that this is 2022. Which would have been, I think, like, the first year that people were going, maybe we're kind of not in a pandemic anymore. Mm-hmm. And we would have been into the Biden presidency. And
all of the moments of them gathering around the TV as Reagan is starting to run. Mm-hmm. I wrote in my notes, like, wow, this feels really full circle.
Yeah. Well, and I think in that moment, there were probably a lot of us who wanted to go, maybe the Trump presidency was just a blip and an aberration. So I find this movie to be very ominous foreshadowing of the return of Trump. And it's interesting because if you think about people not knowing that Trump would run again and that he would win, I wonder if that changes how we interpret some of these reviews.
Ooh, okay.
So just something to think about.
I find it interesting to think that there's anybody who really thought he wasn't going to run again.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
so
but...
I think that's kind of there's kind of a moment of, I think, people feeling like, oh, we made it out.
Right, yeah.
And then also kind of this impending sense of, for now.
Yeah. Boy, you don't know the half of it. That's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I also think that a lot of us probably want to believe that even if he ran again,
oh no, absolutely,
he'd lose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was right up there.
Yeah. And I will say, watching this movie, I was kind of to me, I feel like you hear people talk about Trump kind of in, well, I'm going to reduce this down to two common ways that people talk about Trump. And that's on the one hand, as this anomaly that, just seems monstrously evil. And on the other hand, as this, here's my substance reference, Eliza Sue amalgamation of all that is wrong and ever has been wrong in American history.
Woof.
Yeah. And I think watching this movie, I was just yeah, I can see exactly where this person came from, what shaped and created, and the world that this person was also working on creating. And I think it's interesting because, this Q Forest school was the school that Trump went to before his parents sent him to military school, because apparently he was very badly behaved.
No.
Yeah.
What? I don't believe that. I think it speaks interesting volumes that his parents sent him to military school because he was too bad for the whatever forest school, whereas that's the place that Paul's parents sent him because he needed more discipline.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that's interesting too is this is not contemporaneous with Trump's youth. This would have been when Trump was probably entering a sort of peak in his career in some ways. His 1980s golden age materialism, blah.
His material girl era.
Yeah. And so anyway, so this is set, I also thought it was kind of interesting too that this is set in Queens. So Queens, the world's borough, and I could not figure out, a lot of people seem to think it's the world's borough because of the large amount of diversity in that neighborhood. Though I also, because you and I were talking about one of the shots, I did wonder, is it
the World's Fair?
Could it be because of the World's Fair? I couldn't find, I couldn't find any reliable source that reliably said where the nickname came from. But it is very diverse, and I think that's important to understand for a movie that's so much about race relations and privilege and white guilt. According to NYU's Furman Center, it's 26.1% Asian, 16.4% Black, 28.1% Hispanic, and 23.2% white as of 2023. I don't know what it was like in the 1980s, but I believe it's always been a pretty racially and ethnically diverse neighborhood. Yeah, but do you want to talk about what you found out about that one? Do you want to talk about that one beautiful scene in the park?
Sure, yeah. So, there is, in one of the very sweet scenes with Paul and his grandfather bonding, Paul's built a rocket. His grandfather bought him a little model rocket as a going back to school present. Very sweet. And Paul builds it, and it's a proper little rocket, toy from that era that's got an actual, I don't know if it's got an engine or whatever, but it's got a wire and a fuse, and you push a button and it actually takes off. And so they go to, what's the name of the park?
Flushing Meadows Park, which for those who don't know is where the Mets baseball stadium is. Yeah.
Yes. And they go to shoot it off there, and there's this great wide shot of Paul running a few yards away from the bench they're sitting at to go place the rocket, and you can see these really cool structures, futuristic structures in the background, these big round platforms on top of these spindly towers. And I took a picture and I texted to Laura because I was I don't know New York stuff, what is this? And she was good question, I don't know either.
The park was. In my defense,
She didn't know what the park was, and so I googled Flushing Meadows Park tower structures, whatever, and they are observation towers that were built during the 1964 World's Fair. Let me see if I could actually name the other structures, because they were kind of cool too. I have to look back at our text. Let me scroll past the granola picture you sent me. The New York State Pavilion Observation Towers, built for the 1964 World's Fair, and then the building next to it is either the Theaterama or the Tent of Tomorrow, and these are all structures that are still there, that were built for the fair, that are still standing. I don't know if you can go up in the observation towers, but it was very neat and did feel very, 1960s. They looked like Disney structures.
Well, and Belle, didn't you have another comment on the 1960s and this movie?
Oh yeah, it felt, I had to keep, I looked it up twice while I was watching it, because I kept feeling like this was set in like the 70s or even the 60s. I can't exactly put my finger on why it felt that way, and there were many things that should have told me obviously it wasn't, like the computers for one, the fashion for another, the fact that Esther, Anne Hathaway's character, worked and was like running for school board positions and stuff. None of that clocked it. I don't know what about, just maybe it was the visuals, maybe it was like the whole private school feeling kind of like backwards in time. Maybe it was, the relationship he has with his grandparents. They all still very much dress of that era of like when they were younger adults, but the whole thing felt very like 60s, 70s to me. At one point, again, I had so many angry notes about just like, I don't even teach like secondary ed or public school anymore. I didn't like that when I did teach that. That is not the job for me. But I had so many moments where I was like, these teachers suck, and just thoughts about education. And at one of them, I was like, why aren't we looking at this and this and this other thing? And I think I wrote like, I know it was because it was in the 70s, but whatever. But yeah, I had to look it up a few times because I really kept thinking it was not in the time it was. And I guess 1980 is close enough to the 70s, but still, it doesn't feel like it is situated in the time that it actually takes place in. It feels quite far behind.
I do think that's really, and we can talk about this with other stuff too, but there was something about this movie that definitely felt like I want this to be farther away than it is.
Mm-hmm. I want this to be farther away than it is. That's the mood. That really is it. Yeah, because we were talking about this morning, and Laura was like, it's like alarmingly not as distant as I think we think it is. And I was like, yeah, like my sister was born in the 80s. That's not a long time ago. Even though it is longer than we think, because I still think like the 80s, that was 20 years ago, even though it's
well, and I
not.
think it's so interesting that you said that you kept feeling like it was the 60s or the 70s, because a lot of the reviews I was reading brought up that the 80s were sort of dealing with the turmoil of like the late 60s, early 70s, like the political turmoil, like counterculture and all of this. We have like feminism, we have the civil rights movement, we have like this huge like liberal wave in American culture, and the 80s really become this conservative backlash to that. So, and then I think it's interesting because we've got the World's Fair from the 1960s in the background that's supposed to be looking to the future, and it's bright and like
right, the world of tomorrow. And then they talk about Epcot as well, which is very like all like the entirety of any of the Disney parks is very 60s nostalgia, but Epcot especially is very much like the looking towards the future. It's a spaceship. It's the big ball in Epcot is Spaceship Earth, and it's about like looking towards the future. There's even the ride in Tomorrowland that's the Carousel of Progress. So it's a great big beautiful tomorrow. Can you tell we were a Disney World family growing up? And I love Tomorrowland. It's my favorite. And anyway, so the fact that that's like, and then NASA as well, Johnny's obsession with all of the
oh yeah, because we went to space for the first time, or we went to the moon in
the 60s. We went to the moon. We went to the moon in 1969. So yeah, and so his obsession with space and Paul's interest in moving to Disney World, like there's just such a focus on things that were promising and hopeful in the 60s that it felt like it should be.
And I
then
think that this movie really collapses history in that way. It brings what
I love that collapse.
Yeah, because it brings the tumult of the 60s into the 80s, and you can't watch this during a Trump presidency and not feel the 80s breathing down our neck in 2026. Yeah. I thought it was interesting that you said it felt like the 60s and 70s too, because Stephen Gaydos, writing in Variety on January 10th, 2023, wrote an article called How New Hollywood Spirit Lives in Armageddon Time, The Inspection and Vengeance. So New Hollywood was like that late 60s, 70s era of filmmaking, like Francis Ford Coppola, that kind of thing, Godfather. And Gaydos defines that area as nonconformity, provocation, and experimentation were mainstream. And he sees Armageddon Time as being one of these new movies coming out in like 2022 as echoing that old New Hollywood style of filmmaking that became big in the 60s and 70s. Which I think is really interesting. He also brings up like other interesting points too about like normally you would see that sort of spirit in streaming services at this point, which I also like think, I mean, again, talk about like history collapsing or just like moving so fast and then repeating itself. Like, I feel like we're already past the point where, like, this, in 2022, 4 years ago, I think we were still at a kind of golden age of streaming services, and I feel like we're already past the point of, like, high-budget television series. Or not, like...
We're not going to talk about the last episode of Stream.
Maybe not, like, past high-budget television series, but I think we're past, like, the golden age for it. For now, I don't know, maybe we'll like repeat it again soon. And then he also talked about how we're kind of in this moment, and this I think is still true, where franchises are totally squashing personal cinema, which is how he describes Armageddon Time. And I also thought it was interesting too for Anne Hathaway's career, because we talked about how Eileen also felt very reminiscent of that late 60s, 1970s style of filmmaking. So I think it's interesting that in Anne Hathaway's move into more serious indie film.
And these came out years back to back, right? It was 22 and 23.
Yeah.
Wasn't it?
So it kind of feels like she's really going for that aesthetic.
I don't think we've actually talked about Eileen yet.
Yeah. It's interesting because our buddy A.O. Scott over at the New York Times, like speaking of personal cinema, he also called Gray's filmmaking, quote, a series of inquiries into the meaning of home, end quote, which I just thought was beautiful and haunting and a good way of describing this.
Absolutely. I mean, there's, absolutely. Because, you know, Johnny doesn't really have a home. And so that's an interesting take. I you know, Paul's home is quite unwelcoming to him. They don't really appreciate him. The grandfather, Aaron, talks about there's this beautiful and like sad conversation about like why he's in America and like how they came here and, you know, what that home meant to him and how it changed over time. You could look at the school as a place of home. You know, he doesn't want to leave because he keeps saying that's where my friends are, even though the only friend we've seen him with is Johnny.
You only need one good one. I also wonder, this is a little bit of a non sequitur at this point, but do we need a little Trump family history just for those who don't know? Because I know. I feel like there's such brief cameos.
Did you look up? I've never actually seen Fred Trump. If you look up pictures of him, whoever they cast,
he looks like him.
Like the makeup and the mustache and like the casting
John Deal
and the makeup crew. They did a fantastic job. He looks exactly like that motherfucker. It's crazy.
I think when I watched this movie with my dad, I was like, he looks like a snake oil used car salesman.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, give us some family history. I'll just be picturing Jessica.
Okay, so this is from University of Virginia's Miller Center. They have a whole early Trump years. Go to their website. Anyway, this is not where I want to spend my Saturday. So for those who don't know, like we said, Fred Trump.
For contrast, I spent my Saturday baking a coffee cake. I put sprinkles in it.
Fun. Well, Fred Trump was Donnie's dad. He started the real estate business that made the family rich and that Donald would eventually... I'm just going to call him Donald for the sake of not confusing him with Fred. There's
too many. Yeah, it's the whole family. God, there's too many.
So Fred started the real estate business that made the family rich that Donald would eventually become part of. And so this I think is really important for understanding kind of the racial tensions at play in this movie. The Trumps were developing properties for white middle-class families in Queens. So basically like Paul's family in Armageddon Time.
Oh.
And this is interesting, too, because in 1973, the U.S. Justice Department accused the Trump real estate company of discriminating against black people who were trying to rent homes from them. So that's...
They've really been trying to get these fuckers for 40 years, and they still can't hold on to them.
Have hold on the Justice Department, so... Where are the Epstein... Where are the Epstein files?
To hear this information.
Throw that in there. Anyway. What'd you think of this movie, Belle? I'm going to spare people from more Trump history. I think those are the pertinent pieces of information. Yeah.
There we go. Thank you. Accurate. I had a lot of feelings as an educator, which I'm sure people weren't really talking about in the reviews, but...
No, they talk about the teacher sucking in the beginning, but that's kind of the extent of it.
Right. But yeah, no, I had a lot of interesting thoughts and feelings about the differences between the schools and the fact that his mother is an educator as well. I did have some interesting thoughts about, like, the class thing. Like, there's, right after the grandfather dies.
The class
Irving
thing as in, like, school class or social class?
Social class.
Okay.
Sorry. Good question, because I was talking about school. There's this great moment in the after the grandfather dies where Irving is in the car with the boys at the funeral telling them, like, give your mother a moment. The three of us will stay in here. And he has this little sort of heartfelt moment where he's like, Aaron never... Anthony Hopkins, never judged me. He never looked down on me. Like the rest of her family didn't like that my father was a plumber. And I guess Irving is also a plumber now. And that never bothered him. And so they have this like understanding and appreciation of that kind of societal difference. And it was also very confusing because I kept thinking of Moonstruck, which takes place around a similar time and also in New York.
We should have been plumbers like Castorini.
We should have been plumbers like Castorini. And like the Castorini family is like very well to do and quite rich because he's a plumber. And so I'm like, that's an interesting difference. But
and then there's copper, the only
pipe I use.
So we'll have to do a Moonstruck episode, and we'll have to try not to just do the entire
quote the whole movie shot for shot. Yeah.
Because we could.
So there's that interesting moment of like he didn't think less of me because I came from a family of plumbers and we weren't like doctors or scholars or whatever. And then they, turn around and have icky racist societal thoughts against other people, like ostensibly in their fucking neighborhood. Like there's the one part where Anne Hathaway says like, oh, and your father saw a black boy in the alley, so make sure your things are locked up tight. And it's like, what the fuck? And so I thought there was just interesting and fucked up discussions and looks at class. I could go into some tarot that might give us some interesting places to jump off of. I think this might be a good time.
Sure. I do want to just piggyback off of something you were saying though about that scene, like pivotal scene happening in the car. I mean, first of all, I think good note is like part of what I really found beautiful and compelling about this movie was how complicated it was, because that is a really tender moment between Irving and the boys, even though he's also the same man who would break down a door to beat his son with a belt. Like, this is a very complicated family dynamic.
And two, even, like, he has that really heartfelt moment where he's really, truly grieving his father-in-law. And then, like, the next day, when Esther's, surprise, still not over the fact that her dad's dead, he's, like, berating her about it. He's, like, choosing now to pick an argument about whether or not they can afford the private school.
Yeah, and I also think it's interesting, too, that that pivotal moment happens when they're in a car watching Esther, because the rocket scene in Flushing Meadow Parks that we just talked about, Esther is sitting in the car watching Aaron with Paul. And so there always seems to be this moment of none of them can quite understand each other. There's always this barrier.
Talk to each other.
But they talk a lot.
Oh my God.
But not to each other. No. It's a very, very complicated family dynamic.
Which I think makes unfortunate sense for families at the time. I just think that's not, I think we talked a lot about, like, the differences between, like, the way parents, it's fascinating to me how we don't do this for every movie, but sometimes we just get into these conversations before we record and we're like, we have to stop, we need to talk about this on recording. So we were talking about that element of, we were talking about those scenes where Irving beats his son, and I don't know if I have it in here or if I said it in a conversation or if I just thought it, but we see Irving do that to his son. We get a very clear understanding this is not the first time this has happened, and this is not an unusual thing to happen, probably to both of the boys. I get the impression from the way that Ted, the older brother, talks about the school, capital punishment is probably also something that happens at the school.
Corporal.
Corporal punishment!
Don't worry, the boys are not getting beheaded at the school. It's really fucked up, but it's not that fucked up.
It's not that fucked up. Thank you for correcting me. Oh my God. Corporal punishment is probably something that's happening at the school. I know when I was in elementary school, that was still a thing that was happening in my school system. So, like, we talked about just, like, the distance and the change of, like, that being a thing that was, like, appropriate but maybe not talked about in families in the 80s, and as we move further into the 90s and early 2000s, that was very much like a, no, that is absolutely child abuse, you fuckers, kind of thing.
Well, I'll just add on to that, too, that part of what I was saying is, like, like, I described the parents as hot and cold, and I felt like my initial reaction was, I am, like, so confused by them, because there are moments where they just seem like a messy but loving and genuine family, and a very real, honest depiction of a family. But then there's a really horrifying moment where the father is coming after his son with a belt. And so I was asking Belle, I was like, do you think that these, like, I was like, in a way I could imagine these parents actually looking down on child abuse and seeing what they're doing is just totally, like, that's just, like, how you discipline your child so that he's gonna grow up and have a good life. And, and so I was asking Belle, like, do you think that, like, in 1980, that's how it would have been seen?
Yes, and the point I was getting to, thank you for bringing me back there, was I think the same for, like, the way that they don't talk to each other. I think just in 1980, that was what your family did. That was considered an actually perfectly normal, quote-unquote, healthy family, was that everybody kind of kept to themselves and no one talked about things and no one rocked the boat, and then it all kind of exploded at dinner when a kid doesn't want to eat the fish and grabs the phone and orders Chinese instead.
So, actually have...
that really stressed me out, that whole dinner scene
was really chaotic.
Oh my God.
On that note, I have a section of my notes called Critics Who Hate This Little Boy.
Oh!
And one of them...
I mean, I did hate him a little bit whenever he was running around the kitchen ordering Chinese after his mother cooked dinner, because I was like, dude, just eat the spaghetti. Don't eat, like, there's so many ways around this, but whatever. But also, I would have been absolutely terrified to act that way when I was a kid, so...
Yeah, I can't imagine actually picking up the phone and doing that either, but... I can imagine throwing an entire temper tantrum, but not ordering my own Chinese food. It's a little funny.
It's a little funny. Because then after, like, you learn that he was successful and they did get the Chinese food and nobody seems at all bothered about it and they're just going to eat the leftovers.
They all seem actually happier to eat the Chinese food. Yeah. I get the feeling the mother's not actually a very good cook.
No, well, do you notice when she said, I teach home economics, do you know what that means? It means I teach people how to stay on a budget. She doesn't talk about, like, cooking or housekeeping, which is what home economics technically is.
I mean, economics
right,
is in the name.
It's the budgeting.
I always wondered why it was called economics.
Right, but it's so funny that she doesn't highlight, like, I thought she was saying, like, do you know what I do? I teach home economics. That means I know how to cook. And she didn't say that, though, which is very telling.
No. So that scene, though, did, like, piss off one reviewer, but I just thought it would be interesting because
critics who hate this little boy.
Yeah. Listen, Paul seems like a handful.
Oh, yeah.
And he can definitely be really annoying. And I definitely think if I was his mother, there would be moments where I would be at my wit's end.
But, like, who's not annoying when they're
like
11
all
years
mothers.
old?
Yes. See, that's the thing, is I also feel that he's a very honest portrayal of a rambunctious little boy who's very misunderstood.
I distinctly remember at that age deciding that my name was going to be Odette, like the princess from the princess, the Swan Princess. And I found a bunch of "Hello, my name is" name tags in our house, and I put one on myself, and for like 3 days I walked around with that, and I would not answer unless anybody called me Odette. I can imagine that being just as frustrating and also dragging my mother to the end of her wits as ordering Chinese food in the middle of dinner.
I remember waiting for my owl to come with my invite to go to Hogwarts.
Oh, bless. Are there actually, like, do you see a lot of owls in New Jersey? Did you get your hopes up at any point? Like, oh.
No, there are owls in New Jersey, but they're very good at not being
That's
seen.
fair. They are good at that.
Yeah. Okay, so anyway, our friend Steven over at Variety, who wrote about the new Hollywood spirit, describes Paul as, are you ready for this? All right, so this movie is, quote, portraying an adolescent version of himself, being the director James Gray, as craven, calculating, and capable of a soul-crushing betrayal.
I don't understand people who describe literal children as calculating or manipulative.
I know, I'm like, he's a kid, he doesn't know what he's doing.
Like, what the fuck? That's fucking creepy.
The whole point of this movie is him gaining awareness of what he's doing.
Including betrayal. I get that part of the conversation, for sure. Calculating. He tries to own up to the crime.
Craven.
He tries to tell the cops, it was my idea. I jumped into the school first, and then, this is a haunting bit I wanted to say, Johnny admits to it, is like, it was all me, he wasn't even there, and then when the cops leave the room, he looks at Paul and says, let it go, man, don't make no difference.
Yeah, because I think Johnny knows that there's no situation in which those cops are going to let him
No, he understands the situation, and Paul doesn't, and that's when Paul, afterwards in the car realizes, like, even though there wasn't anything he could do, he's, like, crushed that there really wasn't anything he could do. But Craven, no, he tried to admit to it. Calculating. I mean, he does steal a lot of money
it's like
from his
he's
parents.
11.
I don't know, but that also feels like just a thing an 11-year-old does. Whenever,
I know.
That's all the parents for not changing up where they hide their money.
I know, really. I was like, really, you keep hiding the money there.
You didn't notice it was going missing?
Yeah.
How about the bank?
Yeah. But I don't. Also, I think calling a child craven is really a horrible word to use for a child.
Of course, kids are scared of things. They're kids.
And I think, So I thought that was a really.
That's pretty harsh, man.
Harsh. That was harsh. that felt like somebody who would. Anyway. Okay. Going on, all three of these come from Variety.
Oh, okay.
Variety did actually publish some raves of this movie.
Okay, I was about to say, they did not like this movie. Yikes.
On May 19th, 2022, Owen Gleiberman, writing for Variety, in an article called Armageddon Time Review, James Gray's Deaf to 1980 coming-of-age memoir is an old-school liberal message movie in progressive drag, described Paul as, quote, too entitled, end quote.
Well, yeah, but I think that's... Okay, damn it. I say this every time, and I preface this with, I hate people who say, oh, you didn't like the movie because of X, Y, and Z. Well, that's the whole point. I'm right with you, but I will say that is the point, is that he is entitled and then he learns.
Yeah, and I also think that the movie, you know, like we have, let me check what her name was, Esther Zuckerman in the New York Times, like puts this movie in a canon of Jewish films that, you know, actually delves into a Jewish experience that usually doesn't get to be portrayed on screen. So I also think, like, reducing the whole thing to too entitled is also ignoring the complexities of Jewish culture and class that's also at play.
That's absolutely fair. I think I was just thinking of it as like a 11-year-old kid who doesn't understand the world kind of thing.
Well, that's the other thing.
You're right.
I mean, he's also like 11 and doesn't know not to be entitled, and, you know, because in some ways he does have the middle class privilege of having grown up with a certain amount of security, but
and I don't know if
it's just
I don't know if that's,
but it is also the point of the
yes.
movie. He's having like a coming of age. Somebody called it like a political coming of age, because he's learning how race in America works.
I didn't pull a card for him, but he would very much be the Hierophant if I had done that, because that's all what that card is all about, is like depth of understanding and becoming individual and learning about things.
Wait, for Paul?
For Paul, yeah.
Oh.
Okay.
Interesting, Paul did not get a card?
No. I've got one for Johnny and one for Esther.
I have one more description of...
Well, wait, can I talk about entitlement a little bit more?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, go
so
for it.
I can understand. I would definitely.
Though this one goes in.
Okay.
Goes with the entitlement pile.
I think that's a fair word for him, like outside in the world. So, like in his interactions with Johnny, the kids at his school, that sort of thing. Yes, I agree with entitled. But I think if you're referring to like the way he behaves at home, I don't know if entitled is the word I would go for. I think he's the youngest in a very big, very loud family, and the way he behaves is a direct result of him feeling like he's not been heard. I think that can go a number of ways. When I am also the youngest in a very big, very loud family, and I went...
Bella, are you feeling a little bitter right now?
I had so many feelings about this movie. It goes one of two ways, but it can go a number of ways. But the way that I reacted to that as a kid was the exact opposite, and I like went very quiet, and I would shut down and like... people that, you know, my family would be having like this big loud conversation over there, and then they'd realize I'd been over here in the corner for 20 minutes and I hadn't said anything, and they're like, you guys, she's plotting to destroy the world. Like, we would make jokes about that. But he has taken this, Paul, as like, okay, if you're not going to listen to me, I'm just going to do whatever the fuck I want anyway. I'm going to order Chinese in the middle of dinner. I'm going to make you make me waffles because I don't want the bagels. And I don't know that I would classify that as entitled. I think that's him just like, no one's going to listen to me anyway. So who the fuck cares anymore? Resigned is more of the word I'd give it in his home.
On May 20th, 2022, Clayton Davis, writing for Variety again, in an article, titled Armageddon Time Proves Not All Auteur Childhood Portraits Are an Oscar Slam Dunk.
Was that a belief that many people held?
You know, that's a good question. I don't know. I can't say that I...
Like, again, for like the 9,000th time this season, I feel like especially, please show me some examples of what you're talking about.
I know. I also have to say, like, I don't think I ever thought of the, like, sub genre of auteur childhood portrait movies before.
Right.
I mean, in these critics' defense, I don't remember if it was our pal Clayton Davis or if it was somebody else, but somebody does, like, say, like, there was also, like, The Fabelmans, I think either came out this year or around this time, which was Steven Spielberg's, like, semi-autobiographical movie about his childhood, so...
I'm just thinking about last season, Whiplash, wasn't that?
Yes.
Semi-autobiographical, yeah.
Yeah. So, I guess... Okay. Anyway...
I don't disagree it's a genre, but, like, what was that like a big scary Oscar bait category that like that's something we all as a community agreed to be the truth?
Right. Like, I would like to know which of these have won Oscars. So Clayton Davis writes, quote, "He's," meaning Paul, "a spoiled brat, utterly disrespectful to his parents who can make you squirm in your chair." End quote. Again, I just think these are really terrible ways for adults to talk about children. Like, it just makes me feel like all the people who wrote this, like, could easily have been the terrible teacher. You know?
I think
maybe that's
if you
mean, but...
see a kid's home life where he gets beaten by a parrot and you call him spoiled, you have a lot of inner child work to do.
Well, it's interesting because I think our pal Steven from Variety, the first one we read, I think he mentions in his review, because he's the one who's really interested in the whole new Hollywood thing from the 60s and 70s, and I think he actually mentions in his review that he's old enough to have lived through that. So I kind of wonder if some of these critics watched this on screen and were like, this doesn't really seem like that bad of a childhood to me.
I do think his grandpa spoils him a bit, but like
But that's
not
what
in
grandpas are supposed to
That's
do.
what grandparents are supposed to do, exactly. Like, my grandpa didn't bring me a present on his birthday, but every time I would go see my grandparents, either him or my grandma would sneak $10 into my hand at some point. You know, that's what they're supposed to do.
Yeah. I would get fed generously.
Nice.
And probably also
you had a nonna.
Yeah.
My grandma is who we called Nina, because I think the goal was, I don't remember if the goal was to say Nonna or not, because she's not Italian. My grandpa's family is. I think it was supposed to be Nana. Audra couldn't say it, so we came
And
up
her
with
name
Nina
does
instead.
not sound like Nina. It has
Her name is Bonnie.
Okay.
Anyway, she was an excellent baker.
Yeah.
So we would get a lot of sweets.
I love the name Bonnie. Anyway.
Isn't it sweet?
It's really sweet.
I have her stand mixer in my kitchen because she's not supposed to be on her feet so much, so she sent it to me, and I got my friend with the Cricut to make a big sparkly vinyl sticker that says Bonnie in cursive on the
Aww.
side of the mixer.
I love that.
It's cute. I used it today to make my coffee cake.
Yummy. I do want to also say, because I know we were talking about class, and you said that could be a good segue into your tarot. So, Variety did publish a rave review. It was Tim Gray, no relation to James Gray, wrote an article called Armageddon Time, Tough Truth in Tender Funny Film. I don't know that the word funny would come to mind right away for me. For this movie.
Some bits of it were funny,
it had funny
but
moments,
I wouldn't describe the whole thing as funny, but it had its moments.
I would say that I was crying more than I was laughing.
Yeah.
But, so he was writing in Variety on December 9, 2022, and he has some quotes from director James Gray, who talked about how this like moment of the early 80s was really interesting because the GDP, the national GDP, which is like an economic thing that has to do with like how wealthy the country is. That's the extent of my economics knowledge.
Same.
Was increasing in the 80s. I feel like some economists is going to listen and come after me for that description.
Laura, no economists are listening to this podcast.
Anyway.
I'm going to cut you off right there.
So the GDP was increasing in the early 80s, but middle class income was stagnating. So I think that that's really, like, Gray is definitely very aware of what's going on historically and economically in this movie. And that's a really important part of it. And then he also talks about in this interview with Variety about like the anger that he sees arising when people work harder because that's what they're told to do, and they don't see it paying off in the ways that they were told it should. And I have a lot of questions about how this film defines or pushes against definitions of success, too.
I'm listening to a podcast called Life After MLM right now by Roberta Blevins, who was one of the
MLM?
multi-level marketing.
Oh. Okay.
By Roberta Blevins, who was one of the reps in LuLaRoe. That was in that documentary, and just the way you're describing this is like, oh my god, this is just like what all of the MLMs say when people aren't making money. We've come full circle.
Yeah.
Except now it's MLMs instead of real business.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's a good podcast.
Sounds interesting. I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
Does that bring us back to where you want to go with tarot?
For sure, yes. Okay, so not so much for Esther, but definitely for Johnny. So we can either do them both, or we can come back to Esther if and when it feels appropriate.
I do have a whole section on what people said about Anne Hathaway in this movie, so we could come back to Esther.
We'll hold on to Esther to the end.
You're gonna get two tarot.
Right. Okay. So I didn't pull one for Paul, as we mentioned before. Now that I'm thinking about it more, if I had, I think the Hierophant seems suited for him. For Johnny, the word that kept circling around him for me throughout this whole story was inevitable. So what I've pulled for him is the Ten of Swords, which if you've, I think the image is particular for both of the cards I've pulled. They're both swords, interestingly enough. And the image specifically on like a traditional art style deck, like with the Smith illustrations, is of a person lying on the ground, basically like in a pool of blood with 10 swords stuck in their back. And so it's very like resigned and inevitable and like, oh, well, I guess this is where we are. And so this card is all about like inevitable endings that are painful in some way, not necessarily like physically painful. They could be emotionally painful or mentally painful, but resignation and inevitability keeps coming up when I think of Johnny and his whole situation, because he is just kind of resigned the whole film from the get-go, from the very, very beginning. He knows the teacher hates him and is going to blame him for everything. He knows that social services are coming after him because his grandma's getting sicker and sicker. When we actually do get a shot of him like in his house or in his grandmother's home, like it's falling apart. They are not living in safe conditions, even if she was well enough to be caring for him. And so he's just constantly reminded by looking at the walls around him when he is at home with his grandmother that like things are falling apart. He there's the moment on the subway when they've skipped out on the field trip and they're looking at his little space excursion stickers, and he's talking about how he wants to go to he wants to be at NASA and he wants to be an astronaut, and the other young black men on the subway come up to him and say like, they're never going to let you in NASA, and then they leave the train, and that like shuts him down entirely, because he knows, at least at that point in the world and in his life, that's probably not going to happen. When he's running away from the foster system people and he talks to Johnny, not Johnny, he's Johnny, he talks to Paul. he says he doesn't even entertain the idea of asking to like stay with them at his house or like sleep over or anything. He immediately is like, no, I'm gonna stay in your clubhouse. I'm gonna stay in your fort, if that's okay. When they steal the computer, this is more of a feeling than anything, but he, doesn't let Paul come with him into the pawn shop, because he's like, no, this guy knows me, but I'm also like, does he not let Paul come in with him to the pawn shop because like it's for his own safety, or he knows like it's going to be more suspicious if he goes in there with a white kid? There's the moment I already brought up when they're being questioned by the police where he says, let it go, it doesn't make a difference. Johnny has his finger on the pulse of this situation and what the world is like for him from the first moments of the movie, and he's just trying to make the best of it as long as he can before it comes crashing down. This also made me think a lot about in, Laura and I went to grad school together, and in some of these literature classes or workshops we've been in, we talked in some about how endings feel earned or inevitable is a word we would often use. I was thinking about that inevitable ending a lot watching this movie, because not just for Johnny, but for Paul also, their futures are inevitable. So like that, and especially that moment at the police station, like we all know in there, regardless of whatever is said or done from either side, Johnny is going to get stuck with the blame. Paul is going to get off somewhat scot-free. And the only one who doesn't seem to be aware of this at that moment in the film is Paul. And it's just fucking bleak. So 10 of Swords seems appropriate for, I don't know if that, I guess that's, that is tied up in social class and everything, but.
Yeah. Well, and I think that actually segues perfectly into how critics felt about the way this film handled race. So returning to Clayton Davis writing for Variety, he felt that this was what he called Gray's version of black torture.
That's a lot.
So basically he felt that the character of Johnny, I kind of played into like very grim stereotypes of black people's roles. He doesn't use the word stereotype, I don't think, in his review, but kind of played into this, like, I guess kind of like played into almost like a racialized poverty porn.
Yeah.
Yeah. He does
like
acknowledge
Blindside kind of thing.
Yes. He does acknowledge that he thinks it's interesting for a filmmaker to grapple with his privilege, but he doesn't seem to think it's super successful. Though he does say that the boys are like incredible actors, and he finds it really impressive that the actor who plays Johnny seems to really seem to have this understanding of the role in which race is going to force him into in America.
He's got the weight of the world on his
really
shoulders
does.
from the beginning, and it's heartbreaking.
I don't know how old that actor was, like, actually in real life, but he's like really
incredible.
He's really incredible. And so, like, to kind of piggyback off of that too, going back to Gleiberman, who is also writing in Variety, he writes, quote, "The story doesn't so much care about Johnny as use him," end quote, and that he feels that Johnny is there to make Paul, and he uses the words, a better person. He also seems to feel that this movie is really driven by white savior consciousness. And he says that, and these are his words again, this kind of caring actually became part of the problem. So I think like I think Davis's critique is really interesting because I do see how this can play into that like poverty porn.
I don't disagree about like the white savior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I was honestly surprised that they made it as far as they did in their plan to get to Florida. I had this assumption very early on. Like, my first assumption was, okay, Paul is gonna, like, lead him on and go, like, yeah, maybe, okay, I'll think about it, and then just, like, totally flake on him and just abandon Johnny as, like, a character and a friend or whatever. And then my thought was, okay, they're gonna get to the school and then like a noise is going to happen and it's going to freak them out and they're going to run away, or they're going to get to the school and he's going to go look at his picture, because the whole thing that inspires him to go steal the computers, I can't remember, I don't exactly know how this inspires him to do that, but he remembers his grandfather telling him a good artist, like a famous artist, always signs their work, and he thinks of the drawing of the spaceship he did at school, and then that somehow gets him to let's steal a computer. I don't know.
See, I saw that more as the moment with the spaceship made him... Well, because isn't it that it's not until they're in the school stealing the computer that he realizes the teacher took it to hang it up and, like, give it an award or something?
It's
so
not...
I think it's that he thought this was another teacher who was just confiscating his work and repressing his
and so he was like,
again.
I'm going to get back at the school. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes even more sense for what I was thinking, is that they get into the school, he goes out into the hallway, he sees his drawing in this glass display case with his name next to it, and I thought he's going to see that and go, oh, they care about me here, I'm being recognized, I don't need to do this, let's just get Johnny squared away and he can go to Florida. Like, there were so many points where I was like, okay, now we're going to abandon the plan and nobody's going to go to Florida. And they never got there at any point. Like, Paul was 100% in on this, which I do think gives it that's the moment where I'm like, I think what we were saying before, like, he's really trying the whole time, even though it turns out to be inevitable. But I think that relates to what we were talking about. I'm sorry, we got distracted by my cat.
And your Squishmallow.
And my Squishmallow.
I also definitely had thoughts watching this movie where I was like, this feels like a really bleak portrayal of the Black experience in America. In a world where I feel like we need so much more diversity in filmmaking, and we need diversity in the types of stories that are being told too. I was kind of surprised by the route that this film went. I think for me, ultimately, though, the movie felt very brutally honest about, like, it was so...
I kept finding.
Yeah, bleak is a good way to describe it. And it was so rooted in Paul's perspective that it kind of felt like, I don't know... I think inevitable and futile are, like, the words that keep coming back to me.
Futile. Is it in one of the stories in There, where one of the characters describes a book or a story as like devastating? Yes. Yeah.
It's like, I think that's the first chapter.
Yeah, the first story. Tommy Orange, is that?
Yes. Tommy Orange, There, a novel of connected stories. So there were a couple critics, though, who, actually, like, really were very interested in how this movie dealt with race. So A.O. Scott,
Oh, goodness.
writing in the New York Times on October 27th, 2022, in a review called Armageddon Time Review, Hard Lessons About Life in America, points out that, I'm paraphrasing here, that this wasn't Paul's story. Johnny's story is not Paul's to tell, and this is very much rooted in Paul's perspective, which I thought was a really interesting way of looking at it. It's interesting too because A.O. Scott also says that, there's this trend in American storytelling of a black character acting as what he calls the vehicle of his companion's moral awakening. And he does acknowledge that he feels Armageddon Time is part of this tradition, which I agree.
Yeah.
And for him, though, what pulls the story back, like, makes the story more valuable is he says it's, quote, it is also honest about the limitations of its own perspective. Gray tells the story of Paul's discovery of the iniquities of race and class, but doesn't pretend that this painful knowledge might redeem him. That's where the redemption thing came from. Much less rescue Johnny, end quote.
I did have a moment where I wondered if we were going to get a dual narrative at one point. I think it's when Paul first sees Johnny in the clubhouse. So, like, he's been there 2 nights, but this is the first night Paul's seen him. And it's right after his grandpa's funeral. And at one point, Paul's like, I'll go get you a blanket. And then Johnny's there by himself. And he starts thinking about his grandmother. And we see, like, in his mind where the moment where he's saying goodbye to his grandmother. Because he's like, I can't stay with you anymore. And there's so many things about this scene that were really fucking tragic. The first is that he's got the little, like, single man tear rolling down his face, which was made me start crying. But then I also realized at some point in that scene, I was like, that boy is wearing the same clothes that he has been wearing for over half of the movie now. And I just realized it because I was like, his shirt's really dirty. And then I'm like, well, of course it's dirty. He hasn't been able to change his clothes. And I was like, he hasn't changed his clothes. It made me even more sad. Anyway, not that any of that's relevant, but I thought for a second we were going to get a dual narrative where I'm like, oh, okay, now this is where we're getting the story from Johnny's perspective. And then we didn't. And I'm like, you know what? That's not terrible. I think it would have been interesting to see, but that's like also like, this isn't John Gray, that's the director? His first name?
James Gray.
James Gray. He's not telling Johnny's story because that's not his story to tell. He's telling Paul's story because Paul's story is his. And I appreciated that we didn't end up going into that dual narrative because I think that would have turned into that, like, poverty porn you were talking about.
I agree. And Justin Chang, who, as we've talked about before, is, like, my favorite film critic, on October 28th, 2022, writing for NPR, in a story called A Director Critically Reexamines His 1980s Childhood in Armageddon Time, he says that Johnny could be read as, and these are his words, a regrettable stereotype. And he pushes back on that, saying that he feels that interpretation is, and again, his words, too easy.
Yeah.
Justin Chang sums up Armageddon Time and James Gray's work here as, quote, he's made an angry, despairing movie about one boy's disillusionment with the injustice of the world and his own silent complicity with it. What makes Armageddon Time so powerful is that Gray reserves his harshest anger for himself. I really like Justin Chang because even when I don't agree with him on, like, the ultimate, like, whether or not we both liked or disliked a movie, I always think he thinks so deeply and yet so succinctly about films. Like, he always has an interesting perspective on it.
I agree. I think the impression, I mean, like, nobody's the hero in this movie.
No.
And I think that's the point.
Yeah.
That he's making, and he's making it well.
Yeah.
Like, everybody tries in their own way. Everybody is doing their best in their own way, and it is never enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think he has another couple lines that I think are really important too. He says, "It's also been a while since I've seen a Hollywood movie with such a layered understanding of how white supremacy pits people of different backgrounds against each other. That's a concept that feels painfully resonant now in a moment of heightened anti-Semitism and anti-Black racism."
Yeah, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance when the family talks about being discriminated against themselves and then turns around and does that exact same thing to others.
Yeah. And Richard Brody in his New Yorker article really dives deep into the relationship between Jewish culture and Jewish history and this film. And this is not, he kind of echoes some of what Justin Chang was saying, but he also says that he found himself disappointed that Johnny wasn't more fully drawn as a character. But then he found himself also making the argument that Paul wasn't really, and he actually calls Paul a kind of recording device in some ways. I also, side note about the New Yorker, they spell premiered with an accent to just feels very in character for the New Yorker.
So fucking pretentious. Come on.
Richard Brody's article is called "Another Look at Armageddon Time, a Drama of Privilege and Guilt in a New York Childhood." It's from November 1st, 2022, and it's actually like a gorgeous essay. The PDF came out to like 7 full pages of just really doing a deep dive meditation on this film, and highly recommend it. Anyway, he has some really great lines in there too. Like he says, quote, "The movie is in effect a naturalistic horror story of a practical crime and a moral crime," end quote.
Woof.
Yeah. And he also describes James Gray's style of filmmaking, like across his whole oeuvre, as what he calls faux realism. And he means that in like a positive way, not like in an insulting way, but that sense that he kind of does like harshly honest movies. But the way I kind of read this is that there's still a little bit of tinge of the beauty, and maybe Brody would push back against this word, but the sentimentality of storytelling.
There is, this is perfect timing.
Okay.
I just finished rereading Misery by Stephen King.
When are you not rereading Misery by Stephen King?
It's one of my favorites, and I can't ever get enough of it. And there's a part at the end, you know, when he's through all of the shit where he's talking about, like, he and his agent are talking about, like, you know, if you wrote a book about what happened to you, we could start the bidding war at $1 million and go from there. And one of the things, oh my God, his name is also Paul. One of the things Paul says is, like, he doesn't say it to anybody. It's just, like, in his internal monologue, we see it as the reader, is that, like, he's like, I can never do it because I could never tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. I would embellish. I would want to make Annie Wilkes seem worse. I would want to make myself seem more helpless. I would want to make myself seem more the hero. He's like, no matter how I would try, it wouldn't be able to ever be a genuine, 100% honest story. And that seems applicable here.
Well, I think the other thing that's interesting about that, and about the idea of faux realism in James Gray's work, is that I noticed that a lot of critics seem to struggle with either speaking about this film, I think, too harshly and kind of oversimplifying by just being like, I'm going to point to these shortcomings in these characters and then use that to dismiss everybody in the whole film as terrible.
I think a lot of critics do that with a lot of movies.
Yeah, that's true. And then, you know, on the other hand, though, there were some reviews that were like, oh, he's like a tough but ultimately loving father. And I'm like, oh, I don't know. I have some problems with Irving. I don't know that quite, you know, or they talk about, like, you know, the dinner scenes as like, they're just a boisterous family. And I'm like, I don't know. Those dinner scenes are like pretty stressful. That's not like fun. Boisterous kind of implies it's fun and gleeful. And I don't know that I would call it that kind of energy.
I texted Lori about this. I was like, I will definitely be talking about the dinner scene in therapy on Monday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that the other thing that's interesting about faux realism, though, is that this movie is looking back at doing a very close look at a 1980s childhood at the moment we're in the peak of like 1980s nostalgia. I mean, like 2022,
Yeah.
we're like 6 years deep into Stranger Things.
Right. Oh
You
my
know?
God.
So I thought that was kind of interesting too, that this movie comes out at this moment when you kind of see very nostalgic looks at the 1980s that really gloss over the horrors of the moment. Yeah. So, should I tell you what critics thought about Anne Hathaway in this movie so we can talk about her tarot?
Yes.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about what you thought about Anne Hathaway first before we get into critics? Or do you want to do that as you're talking about the critic stuff?
I mean, I thought she was amazing. I thought she was kind of scary.
She was kind of scary. I was actually quite like, well, okay, Mom, God. I remember at one point, oh God, when I think it's before her father dies, but she knows he's sick, and she's on the couch with Paul, and she says something like, all my hopes are with you and Ted, you're all I have now. And I remember I was like, geez, Ma, no pressure. Fuck. Ugh.
Yeah. And yet at the same time, it's such like a heartbreaking moment where it's like, she does love them. She does care about being a good mom, but she also just really has no idea how to get through to them. I mean, part of that is probably because she thinks the idea of good discipline is sending them to their father who's violent. There's that terrible moment too where isn't there like a shot of her on the staircase kind of like wincing as she hears the father beating him?
Oh, you mean at home? I
Yeah.
don't know. I thought you were talking about the staircase at school.
No, that's also a scary moment.
Because at the staircase at school, after he gets caught with marijuana, they whip around the corner of the staircase, and she grabs him by the neck, basically, and shoves him up against the wall.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't remember her. I believe you. I don't remember her
Well-
listening to. I'm gonna be honest though. I covered my eyes a bit during that part. So
I think I
might have missed
covered
it.
my eyes at that point too, especially like he was like crying, cowering in the bathtub. I was
Just
like,
saying,
I
"Please
can't.
stop."
I was like, this is horrible. So anyway, she can be really scary in this movie, but I think that's a testament to her acting abilities,
Yeah.
and I do think it was really cool to just see her get to showcase that. So, yeah, generally, she's not actually mentioned that much in the reviews that I found, but when she is mentioned, people thought she did amazing. So Clayton Davis described her as somebody who has been undervalued and misused in her career.
Interesting.
Yeah, and thought
Those
that
are
this
not
was...
words I would describe Anne Hathaway's career with.
Yeah, but he thought that this movie was really like her chance to get to showcase what she can do.
Oh, for sure.
May 19th, 2022, David Rooney in The Hollywood Reporter, in an article called Anne Hathaway and Jeremy Strong in James Gray's Armageddon Time film review, Cons 2022, describes the performances by the actors as lived in, which I think is a very criticky term.
Yeah.
That is kind of one of those terms where I'm like, I feel like that's what you want to say when you're like, they did a really good job, but I want to say something more interesting than they did a really good job.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the NPR article with Justin Chang, he says that she, quote, does her finest acting in some time as Paul's gentler but more resilient mother. Gentler relative to his father.
Yeah. It's like gentler, not gentle.
Yeah. Emphasis on the
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what I had for the Anne Hathaway response.
Well, on the note of gentler, I think that, that makes a
Yes.
lot of sense. And I think, we are us talking about, you said, like, she just doesn't know how to get through to Paul. I would argue either of her kids. I think Ted's just a little more scared of everybody, and so he behaves a little better.
Tarot.
So for Johnny, we had the 10 of Swords. For Esther, I have the 9 of Swords. And this one jumped into my head immediately before I even was, like, exploring more about, like, the meaning, upright, reversed, anything like that, just from the image, which is of a person sitting up in bed, like, presumably in the middle of their night, like, clutching their head in their hands, just, like, with fear and anxiety and worry. And I'm like, yep, that's Esther. So, and I think it works for her both ways. Upright, it represents like fear and anxiety. Reverse, it represents like secrets and inner turmoil and agitation. I think she is battling with the things around her as much as she is battling within herself. And the way that she is battling within herself gets rubbed off on the way she battles with the things around her, which is not good. She's all over the place. She, you know, as you said, is trying to get through to her kids, but just can't. And it can absolutely be true at the same time that she's trying her best, that she is also doing a terrible job. And that just really sucks in the way that I'm sure it makes her feel about herself and the way that it impacts her family, because there's moments where we do get to see this gentler side of her, where she can be the light, fun mom that she probably would like to be more of the time, like dancing at dinner, like while she's cooking dinner with her dad. And she, whenever, you know, Paul comes down the stairs in his new school uniform, she gives him a smile and a kiss, and she's so proud of him and happy. And, you know, at the brunch, when everybody else is eating bagels, she's going to make Paul some waffles because he doesn't want to eat what everybody else is having. I also had a lot of hangups about him being a picky eater, because I also grew up a very picky eater. But when you look at like the opposite side of the coin, basically, of these moments, there is this, you know, awfulness underneath as well. Like they're like blips within darker situations. So like her father gets her to stand up and dance with him while she's cooking dinner because he can sense she's getting upset over like Paul's behavior. She is like smiling and laughing at Paul's new school uniform, even though he's like totally feeling betrayed that he has to change schools. And she's also probably having the same thoughts that her husband is having of like, this is so expensive. Can we really afford to do this, even with my mother's help, and blah, blah, blah. The reason that she makes Paul waffles instead of bagels is because she says to her other son, like, leave him alone. He's in a mood. But like, she's 100% the reason why he's in that mood, because it's like the day after he was caught at school and that his father beat him. And so I think these things catch up to her in these really tough moments. Like we see her crying a lot, just sort of in the background. She's very checked out of all of her conversations after her father dies. The moment in the school stairwell where it all bubbles up and she grabs her son inappropriately. So like this sort of sitting up in bed at night with fear and anxiety is like constantly right under the surface of her behaving well. And it just jumps out at any moment that surface breaks a tiny bit. And it sucks.
I think with all of that too, the other side of it is kind of what I started talking about earlier about how this movie defines or pushes back against traditional definitions of success. Because I also think a lot of her struggles come from her desires for this very, I think especially like emblematic of the 1980s, a materialistic definition of success, which is just one of the many layers of like contradictions and hypocrisies present in this movie. Because like the father talks about like, oh, Aaron always respected me even though I came from a more working class background, even though I have like a blue collar job. And yet at the same time, Irving and Esther both put so much pressure on their children to get into this private school where they experience like, I mean, I kind of, it's implied that there's anti-Semitism happening at the school.
When he meets Fred Christ Trump in the beginning of the day, the guy's like, what kind of name is Graff? And he immediately like scares himself into like admitting, oh, well, it used to be. And then I do not recall the actual pronunciation of their previous Jewish last name, but
right. So he faces anti-Semitism at this school, and the, you know, their idea of like success is not, well, I mean, it comes back to the comment that James Gray made about this idea of like work harder and you'll be successful, and people finding that not to be true and then just becoming really angry. And I really see that embodied in Irving and Esther. And I think a lot of their inability to connect with their children is because of that.
Yes, they feel like failures in a lot of ways, more ways than one.
Yeah.
I keep thinking in my head as we're talking about this, like, work harder and you'll do better, but that's not the truth kind of thing. It just keeps making me think of a line from Weekend at Bernie's, where Andrew McCarthy is talking to the other guy and he's like, The other guy's like, you work hard and this is what you get. And he's like gesturing to Bernie's great fancy house. And Andrew McCarthy says, my old man worked hard and all they gave him was more work. And yeah, that's happening here.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I ultimately really enjoyed this movie.
Yeah. It was a tough watch, but I'm glad I watched it. I'm glad it's a movie I have seen and would watch again.
It's a really tough watch, and I have to say, in the beginning, I almost gave up on it, and I'm glad that I stuck it out, because I do think it is bleak, but I do think it's bleak because it really, really wants people to think about the importance of thinking critically and thinking for yourself, and doing whatever you can to,
saying something back.
to find your own success, to say something back in whatever way you can. And it, to me, felt like a movie that I really wished more people had seen and that more people were aware of, because I do think it hits at the crux of a lot of the issues that, especially now that we know how things are playing out with the return of Donald Trump, that I really wish more, I mean, a lot of people are thinking about, but I think that this movie brings a lot to that conversation in a very emotionally powerful way. So I will also say this movie, I believe it premiered at the Cannes Film Festival in 2022.
And how it's pronounced?
Cannes?
Yeah.
I think I said Cannes. It's Cannes Film Festival. It's French. You don't pronounce half the letters.
There you go. The film festival. It premiered there.
Yes, and it received a 7-minute standing ovation.
Wow.
Yeah.
I believe it.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's so much more that we could talk about, but I think that kind of wraps things up.
Yeah,
For me. What about you?
Let me see if there's any other notes that I have that were worthwhile. I think in other ways that, there were lots of ways, like the dinner scene, I was like, wow, that felt like Thanksgiving at my dad's house. Yikes. But then there were other things that reminded me of just like little moments of childhood that were just joyful, that were enjoyable. Like them, they skip their school field trip and go to an arcade and are playing pinball machine.
Yes, I love that.
When they're on the subway, they're like trading stickers. Mm-hmm. I love that.
I love the moments with his grandfather.
When he's shooting off the bottle rocket. When I was in GT in like 4th grade, we made little paper rockets with like the little
what is GT?
Gifted and Talented. Sorry. It was it's just, you. I now as an adult have a lot of thoughts and feelings about gifted programs. Anyway,
I don't think we had that at my school.
Yeah,
I've never heard
and I don't think you're the worst for it. You would have been in my school. Anyway, we made little paper rockets that you put on top of little plastic canisters for like holding film, and you put water and Alka-Seltzer tablets in it, and then put the little lid on it and put it on the ground, and then the pressure would build up and it would shoot up into the air. And I remember I specifically bought orange flavored Alka-Seltzer tablets because I thought it would look like fire coming out of the back of my rocket, and it did not.
Adorable.
But yeah, there were lots of little moments of joyful childhood that like I was amazed that these kids were finding in the state of the shit that they were going through. Like we already talked about also those little moments where we get into Paul's head and see his little daydreams of like, Johnny in a spacesuit and him like designing stuff at Disney, and it was very genuine, and I think it made it even more heartbreaking in the end to see how things turned out for them. But I really enjoyed a lot of it. And my last note that I have here is Jesus, Ghost Anthony Hopkins really scared me. Yeah, because he just came out of nowhere.
No, it's a really, even though it does have its funny moments, it has its really beautiful, poignant moments too. I don't think I would like this movie if it would just really went on the entirely bleak route. And that's the thing. It resists stereotypes. It resists complete despair and bleakness, and and it resists characters who you can read simply, which I appreciate.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no character that you're like, okay, except for the teacher, because fuck that guy.
Yeah, but fuck that guy.
But besides the teacher,
And
there's no
Fred
character that you
Trump.
can be like, and Fred Trump. There's no other character that you can be like, they are inherently, entirely the bad guy and only the bad guy.
Yeah.
Or the other way around.
Yeah. Watch Armageddon Time if you haven't already.
Yeah. It's on Peacock right now,
Yeah.
I think. And it's generally enjoyable.
Yeah. And
Makes you think.
If you need a lighter romp, we have many lighter episodes.
Yeah, go watch Princess Diaries.
Yeah. Go watch Ellen
Or listen to
Enchanted.
Princess Diaries.
Ocean's
Oh.
8.
Ocean's 8!
Devil Wears Prada.
Oh, I'm excited. Mm-hmm. All right.
All right, take us out, Bill.
You can find your Silver Nitrate Witches on various online platforms at LJ Valenza and at Bellang303. Thanks so much to Fine Motor for the use of their songs Highway Moon and Movie. You can check out more about the band at finemotormusic.com. Thanks for listening. Stay witchy and keep watching movies.
On the dark side, shine the light. You can try, but you